Welcome to the regular Friday program of the City Club of Portland. I'm Mary Kramer, president of the club. Our tradition is that we introduce our new members first, so I will introduce them and I'll ask them to stand as I call their names and remain standing until all have been introduced. Then we'll welcome them with a round of applause. First of all, I have Joanne Allen, Director of Marketing and Development, Black United Fund of Oregon. Joanne, there she is. Todd Burton, Municipal Finance Analyst, Burton Consulting. Nancy Chapman, Professor, Chair, Department of Urban Studies and Planning, Portland State University. Kevin Kyler, Attorney with Stoll, Byrne, and Looking. There we are. Bill Stone, President of KP Graphics. Please join me in welcoming our new members. We'd like to thank City Club members Carl Abbott, Rebecca Marshall-Chow, and Anna McManus for bringing these new members to us. A few announcements. Next Friday, the 29th of March, we will find out where Oregonians stand on the issues. Public opinion pollsters Tim Hibbets, president of TH Research, and Bob Moore, president of More Informations, will be with us. Their title is Predicting the Public Will. The speakers will also review the current field of candidates for our next mayor. Who are the voters likely to vote for if they were to vote today? Please join us. We will be here in the Hilton. Wednesday, April 3rd, we'll have an open forum. It's entitled Helping Children Learn, Fresh Perspectives from Business and Individuals. This open forum is sponsored by our Education Standing Committee. The program will feature individuals who are involved in Portland Public School volunteer programs such as I Have a Dream Foundation. We'll have Nancy Standley, Division Manager for Nationwide Insurance, Harold Hart, Attorney and Instructor at Portland Community College, Leonard Gerard, Senior Vice President, Corporate Counsel and Secretary for Portland General Corporation, Pamela Jacklin, Attorney of Stoll, Reeves, Boley, Jones and Gray, and Kenneth Lewis, President of Lasco Shipping Company. This open forum will be at 5:30 p.m. It'll end at 7 at U.S. Bank Corp Tower, 26th floor, conference rooms B and C. It is free and open to the public. Our course, which is a cooperative effort between City Club and Merrillhurst College, called Discourses in Public Affairs, Issues and Answers, is now open for registration. It's a 10-week course that you can get graduate or undergraduate credit for. Students come to our Friday programs, hear the speakers, and then adjourn to City Club office where they may have the opportunity to ask more questions of the speaker, and they talk about the issue at hand. This course is co-facilitated by Mike Burton, who is a state representative and also an assistant to the president of Merrillhurst, and John Sinclair, chairman of the Colleges of Humanities at Merrillhurst. If you're interested, please call Merrillhurst College Student Services. Their number is 636-8141. Our board host today is Gretchen Lashley. She's seated at the head table. She is second vice president. As we have our annual meeting, the latter part of May, she automatically becomes first vice president. Our second question today, Gretchen has the privilege of the first question. The second question will be asked by Alan Hunt, who is the chair of our Human Services Standing Committee and executive director of Rosemont School. As you know, one of the privileges of membership is to be able to ask our speakers questions. There is a mic. It's at the back of the room. Please go to the mic if you'd like to ask a question. Please be sure you do ask a question and not present a statement. And we would like for you to Be concise and clear with your question. Now for today's program. The title of this program does what it's supposed to do. It makes you stop and think. Throwaway Girls, Giving Birth to Social Dysfunction. It creates some cognitive dissonance for us. Throwaway girls? Wait a minute. That's not what our society wants. We say we treasure our youth. They are our hope for the future. We never throw away children. Or would we? The problems some of our young women face today aren't pretty, packaged neatly, or resolved easily. We sometimes let ourselves get overwhelmed and fall back into, oh, I can't do anything. Or we simply close our eyes and deny the problem. Or maybe we even fall back into the old blame thing. They get what they deserve. Whatever the attitude, we resolve the cognitive dissonance and the problem stays with us. So the title continues. We give birth to increased social dysfunction. The loop is closed as our fear increases to ensure the growth of denial of our problems. Our panel today will give us the facts to help us see the issues with more clarity. We're going to hear first from John Ball, who is Executive Director of the Oregon Community Children and Youth Services Commission. John is a graduate from the University of Oregon, a former businessman from Eugene, and a former public servant. He served as a Lane County Commissioner and a Eugene City Councilor. He received the Lane Council of Government's Outstanding Elected Official Award, the Oregon ACLU Civil Liberties Award, and the State Mental Health Division's Outstanding Leadership Award. He will have the first opportunity at the mic. Then we will hear from Kathie Kennedy. She's chair of the Girls and Young Women's Task Force for the Juvenile Justice Advisory Committee. She's going to review the findings for us. She's a former teacher who is a real estate broker now in Ashland, Oregon. She served as a City of Ashland Planning Commissioner, chaired the Education Committee for the Ashland Board of Realtors, and is active in AAUW and Women Entrepreneurs of Oregon, as well as serving on Oregon's Community Children and Youth Services Commission. Our third panel member is Sharon Gary Smith, a youth program development specialist with Multnomah County. A native Portlander, she left us for a while to be in Atlanta, Georgia, where she was National Programs Director of the National Black Women's Health Project. Her community service includes being president of the Women's Foundation of Oregon and Southwest Washington, serving on the board of directors of Planned Parenthood and the Urban League, and she also served as a team member for Governor Roberts' transition team. Please join me in welcoming our speakers.
Thank you very much. It's great to be here. Actually, it's great to be anywhere outside of Salem right now. There's an old saying that no citizen is safe while the legislature meets. I see Donna Clark from the Health Division in the audience, and she will appreciate the new corollary to that, which is no agency administrator is safe when the legislature is looking for $700 million to plug a hole in their budget. The legislature actually took the day off today, so maybe we're safe. Although, unfortunately, this was the day our budget was supposed to be in front of the legislature, so I will let you know next week whether that's a good omen or a bad one. Since our budget has not been approved yet, I'm going to have to knock off the political jokes that I was going to tell. Refrain for a few days. Although, since, as Mary noted, I am a former elected official myself, I might be able to get away with quoting Will Rogers, who said, "The problem with political jokes is that too many of them keep getting elected." Many years later, Henry Kissinger disputed that. He said, all politicians aren't bad, it's just that the 90% who are bad give the rest of them a bad name. But I do want to thank the City Club for really taking a serious look today and throughout your working committees at this issue, particularly the girls and young women that are falling through the cracks, not just in Oregon but across this country. As you all know, this is not something that's specific to young women. Actually, a whole lot of young people are falling through the cracks in this country, and public policy is failing miserably to address that need. It doesn't matter which sector of the service system you're looking at. You're all familiar with those figures from the national level about what a bad job we're doing in all those areas. That I think since 1965, the real, that is adjusted for inflation, dollars going to kids services has actually declined 4%. I think the best indicator that folks use of that on the other end is how well we're doing. On the senior end of the spectrum, that number has gone up 52% in the same time frame. Now, I'm going to look at the color of hair in many parts of this audience and say that's not a bad thing. We need to be taking care of that end of the spectrum too, but I'm going to quote Representative Tom Downing, who said we need to be proud of how we're doing on the senior end, but we need to be ashamed of how we're doing on the kids end. And that's what this issue is about today. It's not just a national issue. It's going on in Oregon too, and you're familiar with this strategy we have now under Measure 5 of funding services in the educational sector of this state. And we're sitting in Salem now talking about doing that with pieces of a strategy like this, taking migrant child care, for instance, from $1,700,000 in the last budget to $0 in the next budget, taking early intervention for developmentally disabled kids from $5 or $6 million in the present budget to $0 in the next budget. Good strategy, huh? On Head Start, which most people acknowledge as the most effective public sector investment we can make for young kids and their families, we've said now that we might get around to fully funding that program for the kids that need it in 1999 if y'all keep playing the lottery a lot. Otherwise, we're even in trouble there. So it's a national issue. To get to some of the specifics of how this girls issue fits into this, if you go back in public policy to the mid-70s, the federal government started saying we have to deinstitutionalize status offenders. Now, what in the world does that mean? Muriel might be the only one in the audience that knows what that means. That means we got to stop taking kids who have done nothing that would be a crime if they were adults, but we call it a crime when they're kids, and locking them up. Instead of locking them up, we got to start providing services for them. And the federal government has pushed that policy. In Oregon, we have pushed it, and actually we've been more successful than almost any state in the country in doing that. At the same time, Oregon has kind of piggybacked on that philosophy, and in the mid-1980s started downsizing the state training schools for both boys and girls, and said, look, instead of locking these kids up in McLaren and Hillcrest, let's get some alternative services going at the community level, taking care of the problem rather than treating it after it's too late. In downsizing and putting those programs out to some kind of alternative program system, unfortunately, what happens on a very good theory is that the services then are given to those folks who kind of show the worst symptoms. If I can say this in not a too negative a way, those young kids who are the farthest along that dysfunctional track, therefore get those services. That means the ones who aren't showing that severe symptoms don't get them. And as Kathie will go into in a little greater detail, one of the problems is that girls, largely because of the way we socialize our young women in this society, don't act out their dysfunction, they act it in. And so they don't show those symptoms in the community, they don't get the services. What this has meant in that state training school downsizing is a loss of 100 beds or slots of services for girls and young women in this state over that period of time. That's at the state level. Not talking about the community level. Here's CSD's numbers. Although girls comprise 49% of the child population, 58% of the abuse victims, and 77% of the sex abuse victims, they receive 31% of the community program services. Obviously, we're underserving girls. Does that have an impact? Yeah, I'm just going to quote you very briefly. The Corrections Task Force's predictions out of last fall's report on what we need to do for prison beds for women in this state in the next few years. Right now, we have about 360 women, average daily population, minimum, medium, and maximum security in this state. Their prediction for 1993, We're at 360 now. In 1993, they're predicting 693 average daily population. That's the basis for their proposal to build, probably somewhere in the Portland area, a 600-bed facility for women in this state. That's about $32 million worth of construction cost and at least 25 grand a year to operate each of those spaces after it's built. That's where we're going on the current track. That's where we come in. Short commercial here for our agency. Oregon Community Children and Youth Services Commission. Great name, huh? We didn't pick that name. Guess who did? The legislature. They gave us in the 1989 session a series of youth programs, 8 or 9, to bring together in some kind of comprehensive strategy to take care of young people, and said, let's do that at the community level. Rather than running that from Salem, let's set up a youth services commission in every county and make that work. That's what we've done. There's one in Multnomah County. There's something in your packet, I believe, that tells you about the projects they're working on. If you really want to do something for kids, get involved with them. But one of the programs we got was the Juvenile Justice Advisory Committee that Kathie has been serving on. And one of the things they've been doing in the last few years is kind of looking out at the horizon in Oregon and saying, what's really going on with kids in this state? Let's try to discern some of the subtle trends toward the negative for kids in this state and start developing model programs to deal with them before they get to be insurmountable issues. That's how they picked up this issue of girls and young women. They saw these statistics. They formed a girls advocacy project. They formed an at-risk girls and young women study group that Kathie's been working on. And now I'm going to turn it over to her to tell you some of the results of their efforts and research around the state.
Thank you, John.
Yeah.
Thank you, John. It's a pleasure to be here today. I always appreciate the energy I feel when I come to Portland. What we have to discuss today will not be quite as earth-shaking as your presentation last week, but certainly as critical. In fact, my daughter last night, when I was working on my presentation, who is 17 and very outspoken, said, "Mom, will they care? Will it make a difference if you travel all the way to Portland to do this presentation?" I have confidence that it will make a difference, and you will listen to the results of our study for this past year. In our small town of Ashland, my daughter and my son had to go through the loss of 3 of their friends in 1 year. All of those children, and they were children, were at risk, and 2 of them were drug-related car wrecks. One was a young girl, 15 years old, that was with an adult male who was not a relative, and that was a drug-related death. And one young boy committed suicide. So they know directly the impact of some of the issues that we face today. During this past year, the At-Risk Girls and Young Women's Task Force, formed by JJAC, completed an assessment of the needs and services for girls and young women. Today we've distributed the report and study, and I urge you to make that some reading that you might enjoy, and please pass it on to friends and family. We made recommendations about resource development and design of model programs that will best meet the service needs for the young women. The age group was the adolescent, which is 12 to 18. This age group was prioritized because the services to that group were the most in question. The JJAC committee had studied the lack of programs specifically designed to deal with the problems girls and young women face in our state. We have recognized the cyclical nature of such problems as teen pregnancy, physical and sexual abuse, domestic violence, and later dependency on the welfare system. We were seeking to develop, or at least identify, a system of services that would respond effectively to these problems and break the cycle of societal dependency. Through this identified need, it was decided to do a 2-prong approach: to promote awareness of the problems and needs of at-risk girls and young women, advocacy, and to assess across the state what each community defined as the most critical issues. The study focused on girls and young women involved or at risk of becoming involved in the juvenile justice system, child welfare, or welfare systems. The study was carried out by the Northwest Network of Runaway and Youth Services in Ashland, the Tri-County Youth Services Consortium in Portland, and the Juvenile Court Resources Incorporated in Ontario. These groups went into all 36 counties to examine both the unique problems facing individual counties and communities and to identify areas of common concern throughout the state. The resulting plan and study provides a blueprint of action on behalf of girls and young women by describing the highest priority groups and assessing their needs. Now, the challenge is to take this information and use it as a tool to advocate for services for girls and young women, as well as to educate many of us who have not had the opportunity to realize the realities of being an at-risk girl or young woman. As a point of interest, I think it's interesting that this report that was completed in the state of Oregon is being used by Senator Biden of Delaware, and his staff at this moment is designing legislature to mandate services for abused girls and young women at the federal level. You'll see in your packet I've included a chart that shows the impact of family dysfunction. I believe it's the pink colored one, and it has some circles, but it goes over what creates family dysfunction, which we found in our assessment was a common thread that ran through all 36 counties. Substance abuse, poor parenting skills, physical, sexual, and psychological abuse, lack of communication or poor communication skills led to the family dysfunction, which created the symptoms that also permeated our at-risk girls and young women. Low self-esteem was found to be on the top of the list in all 36 counties. Poor academic performance, inappropriate premature sexual behavior, chemical dependency, vulnerability to exploitation, victimization, prostitution, criminal thinking and behavior, depression, suicide. It results in service needs, and you'll see at the bottom of the chart what we've tried to do is define the cyclical nature of these issues and these behavior patterns. You also need to realize that this isn't just a low-income issue. These behavior patterns permeate across all economic strata in the state. In a county-by-county survey, each of the first 4 problems were identified by at least 80% of the counties. In the second chart that I've included, we've summarized by showing you the counties, how many of the counties responded. And you'll note that drug and alcohol abusing girls were identified in 32 of the counties as a top priority and issue. Pregnant and parenting teens, which has been on the forefront in the news, both locally here in Portland and throughout the state, was mentioned in 36% of the counties, or 31 of them. Abused girls, both sexually and physically, in 86% of the counties. Homeless, or throwaway as we have termed, the adolescent female, in 81% of the counties. These are issues that are a common thread that run through our whole state. It is very dramatic and clear what the main issues are for the girls and young women of Oregon who are at risk. The behaviors of girls are self-destructive rather than outward and violent. Consequently, their needs are not likely to come to the attention of social service professionals, and we as their parents, educators, friends, and community leaders do not recognize the symptoms of their problems because we have become accustomed to accepting the behaviors until they become chronic, criminal, or manifested outwardly by becoming pregnant, suicidal, hospitalized for emotional illness or physical illness, or worse yet, we realize after the loss. I'd like to take a moment and review the 4 subpopulations that were the strongest in representation throughout the state. The drug and alcohol abusing girls, almost all the counties reported a lack of free inpatient alcohol and drug treatment programs. The 37 community intensive residential treatment beds that are provided for low-income youth are used exclusively for boys. Aftercare resources such as halfway homes are almost non-existent in the state of Oregon. For juveniles leaving inpatient resources, these youth return to their pre-treatment environments of dysfunction, abuse, and neglect that originally supported their alcohol and drug abusing lifestyle. Statistically, if youth have the opportunity for aftercare, their relapse cycle is dramatically reduced in percentages. And I would venture to say that there's probably most of us in this room today have been touched by this issue, or at least one of these 4 issues, in our own personal life or our friends' lives. Free or low-cost outpatient A&D assessment and counseling is available in most of the counties. But their problem is most of the counties reported a waiting list for services and an inability to keep up with the need. Private providers were available to those who had health insurance or could afford to pay. Girls and young women often do not access these outpatient services due to the lack of transportation in many of the Oregon communities, and also due to the fact that these programs often do not become gender specific. Programs are not designed to address the unique issues facing the girls and young women, thereby inhibiting the recovery process. Actually, programs have discovered greater success in working with female groups that exclude the adolescent male, thereby supporting an environment where the underlying issues of abuse, physical and sexual, can be safely explored. Pregnant and parenting teens. Some of these statistics that I've had a lot of them come across my desk in the last 6 months are pretty amazing. And I think that they really are something that we need to address and think about the impact. Over 8,000 Oregon teenagers become pregnant each year. Almost 60% give birth, and of those, 95% will decide to parent their children. That, to me, is pretty profound. These girls are keeping their babies and parenting. There are over 3,500 abortions in the state of Oregon for girls under the age of 19. 1 in 3 Oregon teenage girls become pregnant by age 19. 1 in 6 will give birth by the age 19. I have a daughter, and I'm sure that many of you have daughters, and this is significant. Over 60% of the teenagers that become pregnant are not married, so we're talking single-parent families, and those create other issues, the majority of which come from low-income families. The birth rate among 15 to 17-year-olds is more than 10% higher than 1986. CSD estimates that 50 to 60% of its caseload comes from teen parent households. That creates a whole new avenue of issues, serious issues. Due to lack of self-esteem, poor parenting skills, and personal management skills, services are needed for these young girls and their babies. Access to free, low-cost health care for mother and child, quality child care, high school or GED programs with access to child care. It's one thing to offer the schooling to the girls and the young mothers, but they need to have child care. Employment and training assistance, basic needs for food, shelter, and clothing. Abused girls is another large area that was identified, both sexually and physically abused. In 1989, CSD reported over 11,000 cases of child abuse and neglect reported on children under the age of 18. 58%, as John was saying, of these victims were female, but 77% of them, of the sexually abused victims, were females. Caseworkers throughout the state indicated that abuse was the major factor in the lives of nearly all the at-risk children. Ironically, the treatment for these survivors of abuse in our assessment meetings was one of the least available services. Although problems of homeless youth have been made more visible in Oregon through many organizations and their efforts, the homeless adolescent female population remains invisible, uncounted, and unserved. They are often not on the streets, especially in smaller Oregon communities, but rather live in unstable, inappropriate situations, usually with older males, friends or families of friends, in drug houses, or in unsupervised apartments with other youth. They are very mobile. Some are often enrolled in school but do not attend, and have developed an underground system of survival that is independent of adult authority. They are often described not as homeless but as throwaways, and often are as young as 12 to 13 years. In the urban areas of Portland and Salem, homeless girls are often more visible as a street subculture that is increasingly involved in gang-related activities, prostitution, and drug and alcohol abuse, and related crimes. Runaway youth throughout the state gravitate to the urban areas, and in Portland alone, the estimated number of homeless youth ranges from 750 to 1,000 youth. This is all quite overwhelming, as are many of our state issues right now, but certainly there are solutions. In our assessment, when you read through it, you will note that we have highlighted programs throughout the state that are making a difference. There are recommendations in our report for appropriate solutions and strategies for implementation contained in the report. There are communities that have ongoing programs for girls and young women that are successful and making a difference. These are also identified in the report. Our challenge is to advocate for the girls and young women so their issues are realized and understood, and to provide the necessary networking to link services with youth. What can you do to make a difference? I challenge you to take this information to your colleagues, your friends, your family. Become aware of the subtleness of the needs of girls and young women. Become mentors to those that are in your sphere of influence. Remember that the young women of today are the mothers of the future, and we are the caretakers of their future. Thank you. I'd like to introduce Sharon Gary Smith, who is going to address the issues in your Portland metro area.
Thank you, Kathie. As I come to you, I need to preface my remarks with 3 statements of fact. One is, I have been a girls' advocate all of my life. Usually when you're third in line, given family structure, sometimes that can make you uncomfortable. But since I was the first child of 4 daughters of Bobby Gary, who taught me very early on, you better believe and back what you believe in, I always thought I was special and the only one, and I didn't know who those other 3 children were with my mother and father. That's girls' advocacy on a very basic level. I also want to just digress for a second, and I want to introduce you to, and for those who've met her, reintroduce you to, the very first girls' advocate in my life. In fact, the very first human rights activist, militant, my mother, Bobby Gary, who I just saw come in late this afternoon. My mother, and I introduced her because my mother said, you can wear a big watch and people will say you're not on time, but when I get there, that is my time. And the third and last statement before I talk to you about something that is very pleasurable as well as very painful to me is that it took me a long time in my life to recognize that the world somehow saw me different because I came out of a family of achieving, assuming you could be what you needed to be, women, from a mother who said, you are the light. I want you to go for your best. I expect the very best out of you. I don't want perfection because I don't know what it looks like. And only later did I discover the reason the world looked at me differently, and you could all have your perceptions as to why that might be. I never knew that I was short in the eyes of the world because I have a high opinion of myself. That's girls' advocacy. It is a pleasure for me to be here, and I really do thank the City Club, and I thank all of you community members, activists, educators, social workers, professionals in the healthcare business, people who are raising children, daughters, sons, fathers, and mothers. It's also very sad to talk about girls' advocacy this one time, knowing all that we know about how vulnerable and at risk we all are if we don't work on this issue together. So I want to share with you, piggyback on the comments made by John Ball, made by Kathie Kennedy, but I also want to give you a view from the front lines. I've been there with the young women who are not in the room today, who are continuously vulnerable even while we speak, and who do have a very good sense of what matters. They do know in this society we pay for what we get. And I want to talk just a few moments about what it looks like out there, if that out there is not familiar to you. I want to talk about at a time in our society when all of our youth are particularly vulnerable, bombarded with mixed messages, in many cases not getting good information from us. those they count on, social workers, parents, educators, communities, churches. They are getting important information about how much they matter. How often they are going to be deemed throwaway is a significant problem for me. I'd like to see us move to a place in our society when throwaway will not be the term that's needed to get our attention about young women who are vulnerable to gang activity, who are vulnerable to being on the streets and having the same kind of socialization that suggests that they will become prostitutes or the mules for drug-abusing males who are dealing, or hooked up with inappropriate adult males who neither have their family connection or best interests at heart. I'm talking about young women, African American particularly, because that is the community that I come from and know. Other young women of color, and included in that is white young women, not all from dysfunctional, fragile, non-operating families, who don't have an opportunity to connect with us or communicate with us until they do behavior that we consider to be inappropriate. And then they have our attention. And I also want to talk about what is happening, because there's always joy and a possibility in me that we have all the information we need and all the resources necessary to do the right thing. I simply must believe that, otherwise I could not continue to work with young women and work with older women and work with men about doing something different in our society. So I want to preface the view from the front lines by letting you know I do believe, otherwise we wouldn't be gathered in this room today. And I don't take that occasion lightly. I have spent about 10 years or more working in human service programs. I fell into it out of the private for-profit sector. I was very clear I did not want to be vulnerable or at risk. I like to eat regularly, as you can tell, and I also like to know where I'm sleeping on a regular basis. So I committed to being in the lines but not having to be on the lines, and there's a critical difference there. But what I found working in the National Black Women's Health Project, touring through the South, setting up health education and support groups for young women and their mothers, predominantly low-income, poor, urban, rural community women. I used health as an organizing tool to cause them to begin to be empowered, to be able to see that there is a possibility that they can take charge of their lives, that they can have personal responsibility, that they can access the resources that you and I have and are accustomed to, that they can articulate for themselves. What I found is many young women, particularly the young women of mothers and fathers, who struggle in poor housing, in dangerous and crime-ridden neighborhoods. And if you want to work on ecological problems and environmental issues, that's an environmental issue. The communities they live in, the housing stock that is substandard, the inability to be gainfully employed. I'm not talking about minimum wages. Their parents are oftentimes needing working wages. These young women don't see any success in the lives of their parents in these dysfunctional families. So why should they work that hard or struggle that hard to continue to be marginalized in this society? And they're very clear when they tell me that. My mother and father have been struggling all their lives and they haven't made it, and they're devalued. I also saw a study in 1990 in Dollars and Cents magazine. In that study, there was a very interesting statement made. It was a study in the East Coast predominantly. African American and Hispanic young women up until the 7th grade have a higher opinion of themselves, are clearly more assertive, have a sense of self-power and possibilities significantly higher than young white women. Once they are socialized and in the educational system, their sense of value and options become increasingly limited. They are not benefiting from delaying pregnancy or engaging in sexual behavior because they've seen the writing on the wall, and they do read. So they cannot be encouraged to delay pregnancy just because you should say no. They tell me, say no to what? And where will I be going? And who's thinking about me? Where's the job training and the skills? How will I compete in the technologically competitive 21st century if my parents are not able to make it in this century and at this time? What are you telling those folks out there when they ask us why we're pregnant? Why not? I want to be loved and nurtured. I want somebody to say that I'm the light in their life. I want somebody to hold me and appreciate me. And I messed up and became pregnant for many of us, 40 and over, and I'm now in that crowd and very proud of it. I used to tell people, I'm not confused about teenage pregnancy. The reason that I was not pregnant, and I breathed many sighs of relief, as many of us did if we could close our eyes and raise our hand and tell the truth, is because my mother convinced me that her ability to take me out was greater than any young man's power to take me in. Don't underestimate the power of fear. It is a wonderful birth contraceptive. It worked for me. And I tell you that because other young women say, you need to be scared and terrified as adults. You need to shake in your boots. You need to talk about your parents didn't tell you what you needed to be doing. But you need to go, as I tell mothers, go in the closet and scream and holler. Come back, they're waiting. And they want to talk about sex. They want to talk about personal responsibility. They want to talk about decision-making that allows you to be in charge of yourselves. I always tell young women, you need to get it together before you give it away. You need to know what you have before you offer it out. And if mothers and fathers also are struggling with what it means to tell them the truth, then they buy into their own realities. My daughter is a capable, gifted, high-flying, 17-year-old, 18-year-old actually, fresh woman as we speak. She's at Mills College. They are fresh women. My daughter always used to say, Mom, you need to chill and take a reality check. I was scared. She said, why don't you talk about why you're scared to talk about to me what I need to know? Why don't you say, this is hard, I'm fearful. I don't want you to be homeless. I don't want your options to be limited. I don't want young African American girls to turn for protection to men who are not able to protect or be validated as men. Because in this society, they do read the newspaper, and we are more than 30-second sound bites on national news. My daughter said, Mom, you need to talk to young people. You need to get down and talk about homelessness and being in poverty and having few options and not having education and skills doesn't mean you're throwaway. When we move to a place when we don't have to call them throwaway, then we know that we're moving to an opportunity to do something different. I work for Multnomah County Youth Program Office, and I am so pleased to be able to be there in my way and talk about what it's like to talk to young women who have all this information, who are setting up a home for a gang-related boyfriend who also saw no options for himself, but that young woman will have protection. Now, she also has to fear for the abusive relationship that comes with that, but he'll protect her as long as she belongs to him. She will go on welfare and will have an income because she hasn't been educated appropriately or encouraged, if she's having a family, to have the job skills and the wherewithal to take care of that family. So we're talking about babies making babies and increasingly fragile families. We need to chill and get back to reality. In Multnomah County, through the Children's and Youth Services Commission, there are contracts that are let by the Youth Program Office to do everything from Great Start and parent-child learning centers to student school retention initiatives to keep them in school, but I want them to come out with competencies. I want them to be able to be self-sufficient and productive young women as well as young men. I don't want them to plan on protection and going home to a house with a picket fence, because we know that doesn't exist in 50% of the marriages in America that end in divorce. I want young women to be able to be self-sufficient, capable young women who are able to allow men to be independent, capable men. And I want to do it together with all of us. I do know we have the thinking. I do know we have the capabilities. And recently I was asked, it costs a whole lot of money. The federal budget, we're having all kinds of problems. We have significant fiscal difficulties in this country. I said, I don't want to be in the federal budget. I want to be offline like the war. Then I know it'll get funded. And in closing, I want to say I'm proud that as the new president of the Women's Foundation of Oregon, I'm in a place that is emerging to be able to pay for programs, funding, seed money, programs that empower women and girls to meet their economic, their mental, social, and their physical needs by causing us to see as ourselves we are part of this great society. And I want to remind you, as the Midas Muffler Man does, you can pay now or you can pay later. And finally, Ice-T, a well-known rapper, former head of one of the major gangs of Los Angeles, appeared on a talk show several months ago. He was asked about the gang phenomena. He said, phenomena? Not until a woman was killed in Beverly Hills, California, did they suddenly start talking on the news about 70,000 gang members. People who display leadership qualities, people who are risk takers, who want to be in on the American dream. He said those 70,000 didn't join last night. 20 years you've helped us sign up. I don't want that to be the plight of young girls. They are the bearers of our children. They're the grandchildren we're all looking for. And I want you to come and go with me, and let's just do it.
Gretchen Lashley, Second Vice President, has the privilege of the first question. Gretchen?
Thank you all very much for a very sobering education. I'd like to go back to Salem now and mention what you said, I think, Mr. Ball, that there are some dangerous and ominous thunderings down in the legislature about taking away some of our funding for our preventive programs. And I'd like to know what is going on down there. Is there any hope that we can save these preventive programs? And do you have the names of 2 people we might call to make sure they don't take them away?
More than 2, actually. But good starts are Dr. Kidsauber and Mr. Campbell. I think it's not an unusual situation that kids programs are way back in the line, if not at the end of the line. That happens in good times as well, and it's as simple as the fact that kids don't vote and kids don't make contributions to political action committees. And I think we also have a societal tendency to deal with crisis issues. But it is a very perplexing issue for those of us who've been at it for a long time, that in government where we've been talking for 15 or 20 years now about running government more and more like a business. And which person have you seen campaign lately that hasn't made some bow in that direction, that we need to be more strategic and more thoughtful and more cost-effective about where we make our public service investments? And we continue to overlook the most effective expenditures we can make. We know we get returns of $6 for $1 of investment when we deal with early childhood infant nutrition programs, Head Start programs, early developmental disability screening and correction programs, and there are no better investments we can make. And it continues to be a perplexing issue. I think the fact is that there is not a chorus speaking for children in this state or in any other state, and until the members of this audience and audiences like this in every county in this state contact their legislators and say, we expect you to be making the most cost-effective and sensible and rational kinds of public policy decisions that you can make, there is no impetus on them to do it. That is not to say that there are not great leaders in the legislature for doing these kinds of things, but in general, the support has not been there from the public. And the day it is, the day this club and other civic organizations around the state take it on as a major issue, that's the day we'll start seeing a solution.
Alan Hunt, Chair of the Standing Committee on Human Services, has the privilege of the second question. Alan?
Thank you. I'd like to direct my question to Sharon, please. All of you speak so eloquently on the need, and we've seen so many newspaper articles, especially during the last year, confirming the need. As an advocate, a persuasive advocate, what kind of a mind shift has to take place in not only the legislators, but also the people who form public opinion, newspaper editors, people that are members of the city club, because the facts are there, but we're making the wrong choices?
I think I would answer it in 2 ways, and I'm very fond to be in the arena with the city club. I'm very leery of blue ribbon committees and newly formed task forces to study that which we have significant documentation on. So when I say just do it, I think we really need to be compelled to make decisions as to what we're willing to accept from the media. The media really is us. Those people live in our community. It's not as though they landed. Some of them might have. But most of them are community citizens who are reporting that which we are continuing to accept. So I really do encourage, we do know. When I talk in a way that business people, men and women, understand. I talk about bottom line. This is investment. You are investing in your future. It's like front loading a computer, put in all the important information and get it on the hard drive early. Otherwise, you may find out that your program has been erased. So I talk in dollars and cents. I appreciate and love to speak with men, only because at this particular time, more of them are in power than women about what it means to you to be actively engaged in preparing and articulating about the young people coming behind us, because they are going to be the leaders, whether we like it or not. We are going to go on. We are going to see each other someplace else, and they're going to be in charge. So I really talk bottom line, dollars and cents, front-end investments, what it costs us, what we're willing to pay for, and it is our priorities. I really appreciate John saying that. We are getting what we're paying for. Our legislators are voting what we say. That includes me. What we say we're willing to tolerate. And when we don't tolerate it anymore, and a simple card, I support children. I care about programs that take away teen parenting from young women. They are parents, so why would we be punitive? Let's look about taking care of that child, letting them have an environment. When we write that short note and say, I want to know where you're putting your money because this is my mouth and I'm a taxpayer, they see enough of those simple 2 and 3 line cards. You don't have to do a dissertation. They do set up and they take notice. Thank you. Harry?
Harriet Dennison, City Club member. I'd like to address this to all three of you, and I'm very practical. And statistically, there seems to be a wave, an increase of violence against women. And I know a lot of these kind of global things feel like they get out of hand. Would each one of you maybe give us a small, very practical, maybe less than ordinary suggestion on what each of us can do in our day-to-day lives to begin to interrupt this cycle, think positively, and encourage a shift in values and a shift in behaviors that will more strongly support the things that we're trying to change from that you were addressing today?
I wouldn't want to break a confidence, but we were talking at, we got together just before we came in here, and I think the male member of our group, who will go unnamed, was responding to the fact that we said when it becomes so important to men that you think your lives are in jeopardy, you began to participate in ending domestic and sexual violence against your daughters, your wives, your sisters, your aunts. That is the same as I feel about children and domestic violence. It is an environmental issue. If you want to work on spotted owls, work on violence against women and girls and against boys. That is an environmental issue. When my daughter says, you know, it's really scary to think about growing up to be a woman when she was much younger. It's really scary to think about growing up and you're going to be a woman in this society that talks about motherhood and apple pie and does not protect. So when he talked about when men start being afraid that they may have women respond to abuse and victimization, then they start legislating and finding opportunities for us to participate. I don't want it to go to that place anymore. I want us to think about violence is unacceptable. For women to be fearful is unacceptable. For children to be without protection, it is unacceptable. And then we will cause the legislative mandates to occur to protect all of us. Otherwise, we're all at risk and we're clearly vulnerable.
I also feel that women need to advocate for women. Oftentimes I'll see women step back when they should step forward and speak out. I also feel that it really is our role to be mentors to young women in our communities, young girls, and also to help educate men who are really unaware of the subtleties of some of our societal attitudes. So I really feel that women need to help create this change and need to play a stronger role.
I think there are many ways in which this issue of at-risk girls and young women manifests the lingering issue of the status of women in the society, and that's what we're talking about a little bit. But when you boil it down, that's why there's some special problems here that have to be dealt with in a special way. And I travel in the most educated, progressive, thoughtful levels of public policy in the state. And it's amazing to me in 1991 how far we still have to go in that regard. And it's a responsibility particularly of the male members of this audience and the rest of this folks who are listening around the state, that we have to continue to say we haven't gotten there yet. And until we do get there and hold each other accountable on a daily basis, and that means when the door's closed and all the women are out of the room too, until we start to change each other's behavior on that, we're going to continue to manifest problems with young women.
I'm Marcia Slappy, member of the City Club. I'm going to refer to my notes, if I may. A 1987 Oregon Juvenile Justice Advisory Committee report said that girls are not a priority of the juvenile justice system. The context of this statement was that girls ought to receive more services. And is there a resistance to funding services for girls? John?
I'll take all the help I can get here, but the fact is, I'm not sure it's overt resistance, but in the scramble for funds, I think the issue that we've delineated previously is the operative factor. That is, as the girls act in instead of acting out, the system is clearly biased toward people who are manifesting at the moment the most severe symptoms of disorder. And since we socialize girls to be nice and not do that, and they then do it in self-destructive ways, there is a bias in the system against services for girls. Very few people in 1991 will stand up and say, we want to deny services to girls so we can give them to boys. But by virtue of the values and operational procedures in the system we have, that's exactly what happens.
And exactly that statement that you just quoted from 1987 is exactly why JJAC took as one of their two main priorities at-risk girls and young women as one of the issues, and we did start our at-risk study group to pinpoint and change some of these allocations.
And there is beginning to become, there is a swing that is occurring, but the swing is occurring in responding to girls who are manifesting the same behavior. They're saying they're modeling or trying to be like boys who are gang members, or they're confused about their sexuality, so therefore they're dressing like, acting like male gang members in our society. Acting like a man gets your respect. It has people fearful. It suggests you have power, so they're emulating that which is powerful, and people are now responding with money. But I'd like the foundations and the private funds that are here, the United Ways, the public and private charitable givers. I do believe in music. I do believe in funding symphonies. I believe we need to have art centers. I believe there is no music, and it's not lilting, to have young women suspicious and frightened and scared and not served by a comprehensive service provision system. So I do believe in music, but I want us to fund girls and women the way that we fund Boy Scouts and boys clubs in America.
We have
I
time
want to
for
say
one
one
more
thing.
question, Marcia.
Just wanted to say something personal to Sharon, that I think your mother went to the same school as mine.
A bunch of you, huh? Thank you.
Last question, Jean.
Jean DeMaster, City Club member. I know that Portland's youth shelter serves over 200 girls a year, and clearly double that number can't even get into the shelter. I wonder who you think is responsible for these girls. These are all girls who are under the age of 18. Are their parents still responsible for them? Do you think that the government is responsible for them? Are they responsible for themselves, even though they're under 18? Who has the responsibility for homeless teenage girls?
I could say that is a puzzle. What I do know to be interesting, and just from a community base as opposed to an expertise, but you know, there is experiential expertise in this world as well. What I have found to be true is that, and the juvenile justice system does reiterate this, not until young people have made it into the system, adjudicated youth get all kinds of services and support, not until they've been criminal enough to be noticed and get in the system. And my work is to divert them, to interrupt, to intervene, and protect them so that we put that system in an even keel with the rest of society. So it is sad that young women would be in shelters, away from families for whatever reasons, They can't be there in the moment. And nobody knows who they belong to, but everybody is responsible for them.
It's a very interesting definition about responsibility. And we spend a lot of time in the public sector fighting about who's got the legal responsibility for which kid. At what point does the local juvenile department have authority? At what point then does the Children's Services Division step in? When is it the role of some nonprofit provider? What's the school district's role? And we spend a lot of time load shedding because we don't have the resources to take care of all those kids and saying, no, that one's yours. The fact is that the responsibility sits with everybody in this room and everyone else in the community. We used to have a governor that you heard from a few weeks ago that said, these are our kids. They're all ours, and the responsibility lies with all of us.
I think those children belong to the community, and the community is responsible to them. And I think those are the very children that aren't getting the services because they haven't been adjudicated.
Please join me in thanking our panels for a most interesting presentation. We are adjourned.